It's now my pleasure to welcome Leo Abruzzese, the Global Director of Public Policy for the Economist Intelligence Unit. Leo directs the Economist Intelligence Unit's global public policy practice, overseeing a team that conducts analysis, research, and modeling for governments, NGOs, foundations, and corporations. They partnered with our friends at the Barilla Center for Food and Nutrition to put together a new tool, the Food Sustainability Index, that was recently released. And Leo is going to talk about how the index can be a great resource for both academics here at Tufts and other institutions, as well as policymakers. Please join me in welcoming Leo to the stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Danny. Thank you very much for coming this afternoon. I'm going to spend just a few moments, I won't be here too long, but I want to give you some insights into a tool that we've developed, as Danny said, over the last 5 or 6 months, that's meant to benchmark the sustainability of food systems around the world. So we have called this, not surprisingly, the Food Sustainability Index. But what we think is interesting about this is we've defined sustainability in somewhat of a novel way. We're basing this in part on the Milan Protocols. I'm not sure if you're familiar with those, but the Milan Protocols were developed in Italy a few years ago by the Barilla Center. And the main goal behind that was to look for stress points or paradoxes in the food system. And we thought that these stress points or these paradoxes would be a good way of trying to measure sustainability in a number of countries around the world. So what we've done for most of the past year is to create a framework and then gather data that tries to measure the sustainability of these food systems. But what's interesting about this is we've based this on 3 pillars, which we are using broadly to try to define sustainability. So one of them is around food loss and food waste. So essentially the question we were trying to answer there is how much of the food that's produced actually makes it to your plate? And the answer, I think, is surprisingly little. I'll just ask, does anyone have any idea of what percentage of all the food that's produced actually gets lost or wasted somewhere along the way? 40%. Yeah, well, between 30 and 40%. Worse in some countries, a little bit better in others, but the global average is a little bit over 30%. So that's the first pillar we looked at. The second one was around the sustainability of agricultural production itself. So we looked at indicators like the amount of water that's used in each country in order to produce crops. So a series of indicators behind that second pillar. And then the third one was around nutrition. So we were looking at the quantity and quality of, say, micronutrients. We were looking at how healthy or unhealthy individual diets are in each country. So those 3 things together, food loss and waste, the sustainability of production itself, and then looking around nutrition. One of the reasons we like this approach, we think it's interesting in and of itself, but it also ties in with the Sustainable Development Goals, which I'm sure you're familiar with. This is the UN's framework for trying to improve development, make it more sustainable between 2015 and 2030. So we think that this index, this approach, also provides a bit of a blueprint. So as countries try to reach the SDGs, if they can essentially score well in this index, then they're at least part of the way towards meeting some of the SDGs that are around food and sustainability. So that was kind of the theory behind this. I'm going to just mention a couple of the findings and then talk a little bit about the tool itself. All of this information, by the way, is available on a website that we built special purpose for this project. So it's called foodsustainability.eiu.com. EIU is the organization I work for, the Economist Intelligence Unit. So look for it at foodsustainability.eiu.com. I'm going to mention just 3 things quickly that we found, and then I want to talk just a little bit about the tool. Around this food loss and food waste idea, in almost every country we checked, this is clearly moving up the policy agenda. Compared to maybe 10 years ago, every country we looked at had some sort of initiatives, either public sector, private sector, or both, to really try to reduce the amount of waste. And a lot of this, by the way, was happening with private sector retailers, so it wasn't just all about the government. When we looked around issues of the production itself, some really important issues, and not always very good ones, around the availability of arable land, which is going down in most countries around the world. So this is going to be an issue too. And a third point that I thought was particularly interesting is premature obesity. Think about what that means. Historically, obesity was a rich country problem. The higher your GDP per head, the higher your income per person, the more likely you would have high levels of obesity in the country. Not really anymore. Now you're beginning to see low-income countries, countries with low GDP per head, have increased levels of obesity. So those are just a few of the things that we highlighted. You'll find all the rest of this on the website, this and a lot more. So we have infographics and we have deep dives. But I want to talk just for a minute or two about the tool. The tool is essentially the place where all the data resides. So we created 58 indicators across 25 countries. We have sub-indicators below the indicators. There's a lot of information there as well. And it's in this tool where you can really play around with the data. And that's what we think is useful. You can go in here and compare countries one to the other. You can compare countries against the best practice standard. You can look at strengths and weaknesses. This is not an index where we score you from 0 to 100. You have one number and that's all there is. You can in fact go across these 58 indicators and determine where a country is doing well and where a country may not be doing so well. Now, the tool itself sits in a very nicely designed, highly stylized Excel spreadsheet. For those of you that have a phobia about Excel, and most people do, it's really easy to use. If you can click a mouse and you have even a modicum of common sense, you can work your way through this quite easily. And it allows you to do some really neat things. Besides comparing countries and identifying strengths and weaknesses, you can also go into it and change the weights on indicators, so you can do some sensitivity analysis. You can go through it as well and run some correlations, so look at the relationships between different food issues around the world as well. So there's a lot of really neat things you can do in there. And I hope you're not sort of too put off by weights or correlations. It's pretty simple to use as well. But we found in the past that tools like this are used quite a bit by development institutions. We've had the UN use them. We've had a lot of development banks use them to engage with countries. So you can take this tool, and if you're in the policy arena and you're visiting countries, you can show this to a country and show them where they're doing well, where they're not doing well, how they compare to their neighbors. And also, given the fact that we're in a university environment here, we found that a lot of teachers use this in classroom settings as well, because you can run little exercises on this. You can say, well, how would the country do if we had a greater or a lesser emphasis, say, around water use, or a greater or lesser emphasis around programs that are meant to minimize food loss and food waste. So it's a really nice tool that you can use. You can download it from the website. All of this is freely available. So just find it on the web. And I think you'll find that it's quite useful. There's a lot of data there. For those of you that are looking for data, some of it we collected from other places. Some of it we actually developed on our own as well. So we think it's a nice repository for a lot of information, and you can play around with it and I think get a lot of value out of it. So I'm going to stop there, but thanks very much for your time. I appreciate it.